Hey everybody, my name is Mark, and have you ever found yourself in one of those situations where as soon as you got done talking, you were like, I shouldn't have said that? Well, that's what today's podcast is all about. We're continuing the message from our guest speaker, Ashley Island from the weekend, and we're going to be expanding on what it means to tame the tongue, as well as get a sneak peek of what's to come. And thank you all so much for those that have contributed to this podcast, whether that's by sending in your questions, which you can do to 650-600-0402, giving your time by helping us record and edit these podcasts, or by giving financially. We cannot do anything that we do here without you, and we can't make the difference that we're making, bringing church to people that may never step through our doors in the hopes that one day that they do without you. So thank you so much. And now let's go ahead and jump into today's podcast. Well, welcome everybody to the Menlo Midweek podcast. My name is Mark.
And I'm Phil.
And we're recording right after our Sunday services concluded. And we're still kind of right in the high of Sundays.
Yeah. Well, and I didn't preach, so I feel totally juiced. I'm ready to roll. Let's go.
So you must have had the day off then.
Pretty much, yeah. Had the day off.
Yeah.
I visited all of our campuses today. So
literally all of them.
Literally all of them. So it was some time in the car, which was great. But because Ashley was teaching, I dropped off Ashley and Derwin at Menlo Park, and then went down to Mountain View for part of the first service. Greeted people, connected with volunteers, saw their team. Then went to Saratoga. Was there kind of between the 8:30 and 10. And then drove up to San Mateo and was there at the end of the 10 into the 11:30, and then came back here, and here we are. So
interesting.
It was fun. It was a fun day, and for me, really maybe since I was visiting before I started, I've never been to all four of them in one day. Mm-hmm. So that was a fun little thing to do, and fun to see people experience Ashley if they were unfamiliar with her work, and obviously be encouraged because she's incredible. And so, yeah, it was great. It was a really good day.
Yeah. I'm curious. So at the other campuses, do you feel like the questions you get is, oh, that's Phil, I need to go talk to him. This is my chance to explain or question this thing that I don't like. Is it a thank you for doing what you're doing, a mix of everything? What are those conversations like?
I would say it's overwhelmingly positive. Like, people are very, very gracious and encouraging. I think when people are mad, usually that comes in the form of like an anonymous email or like a note, like that. Some people will come up to me and they have a point of view that they want to let me know about. Right. I got a text message. I'm not even sure I should say this. I got a text message from somebody that was like, hey, I know after the last series that you did on the body and sexuality that you probably felt like you had to do like a woke series and like reflecting on today. And I just thought like, are we listening to the same, talk? And so feedback's a blessing and a gift. And so I try to receive it and learn from it no matter what it is. And I think it epitomizes why having these conversations in a nuanced way is so important. Yeah. And then there are some people that are like, hey, we've never seen you before. Can we get a picture or whatever? So I try to be there for all of it. And it's great. It's, I think one of the things that's fun for me is because like a lot of our campus staff, if it's not Menlo Park campus staff, I don't get to see them like in action all the time. Right. And so that's also really fun to see campus staff teams loving people well, serving volunteers, really like as proud as I am, like to see campus staff, they're standing back proud to see volunteer teams investing in people. So it was great, man. It was a really good day. Yeah. Very encouraged.
Do people at Saratoga, are they surprised that you're not 8 feet tall?
They are. That's actually how I lead off. If you don't know this, Saratoga, we have 3 screens. One is called the virtual teaching stage. So it's like the width of their stage, and it's a lockdown shot of our Menlo Park stage. So whoever is teaching, it's them. Like, it looks just like the stage. There are people at Saratoga who will say, I thought you were in the room. Yep. And so I joke around like, well, I'm shorter in real life. So, and if you've never been to Saratoga, you should check it out, even to just like visit it, because we invested a lot when we relaunched that campus, not this last Easter, but the Easter before, and really launched it with the idea of like, what would we do to a campus sort of in a post-COVID world? Hospitality, kids' environments, next step stuff, auditorium. And so it's so fun to see the life that exists in that campus. The courtyard is next level. Today they had tacos next to donuts, which was a fun combination. Oh. So it was a whole thing. So it's great.
That sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
Got more questions about that, but I'm curious because as churchgoers, we're kind of conditioned that if we weren't in the room for the 30-minute message, we missed church.
Sure.
So in what ways today do you feel like as you're experiencing these different campuses that maybe God was speaking to you, or things that God might have put on your heart or on your mind outside of the message, but maybe through conversation or environments or?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it's like weird, nerdy, organizational inside baseball stuff. So, if you are just a part of Menlo, you maybe don't realize, like where Mark and I are right now, if you're watching or listening, we are in the basement of our D building in Menlo Park where our central team is. And so
For those that don't know, too, Central, I like to use the analogy, is we're like the school district to the school system.
Yeah, it's exactly. Yeah. And
so we have Menlo Park that's maybe 100 feet away, but we're in separate buildings, separate rooms, separate offices.
You got it. And really the goal of that is a church the size of Saratoga couldn't do some of the same things that it can do because it's part of Menlo. Same thing for Mountain View, same thing for San Mateo. And so Central is able to say like, hey, kids directors, instead of having to all week develop the plan that you're going to use this weekend, Central will develop it for you and give it to you. You invest in volunteers, care for families directly. Same thing for campus pastors, right? If you think about lots of smaller churches, those campus pastors are having to prepare to preach every single week. And so they still get a chance to preach 2 or 3 times a year, but most weeks, that's not like our heart is, no, go serve your community, go care for those at your campus. And so that's really fun to me. I think I have some, I would say, convictions around ways that centrally we can serve campuses more effectively that were, I'll say, reinforced on my visits today. There's also things that every campus does a little bit differently. And now having been here for a year and a half, I think a year in, I would have been like, well, that's just kind of them, and that's kind of them, and that's kind of them. But I think now, a year and a half in, there's some things that I look at and go, I know that that's been there for a long time, but actually we're probably better together if we, let's say, for example, like take communion all the same way. Like there's probably ways for us to incorporate that into the service, or whoever is teaching to be able to talk about it in a more unified way if we're doing it more consistently. So I was sort of processing that a little bit. And then some of the enhancements that we want to bring to the other campuses beyond just Saratoga, I saw that need again. But I think, it was just really encouraging for me to interact with people who are newer to Menlo, who I have never met before because they've been here for just a few months maybe, and just their level of encouragement. If you don't know, there are great churches all around the Bay Area, but I think one of the things that the Lord's really given to us at Menlo is that where our physical campuses are a little bit of kind of like church deserts in terms of like growing, I would say kind of healthier multi-generational churches. And so everywhere that you go, you're in a neighborhood that like Menlo is making that neighborhood better, which is, man, that's such a cool thing. And I just think, how do we build on that to be an even greater blessing to the neighborhoods and communities that we get a chance to serve?
And that's one of the things that I'm taking away most, not only from Multisite, but also the series that we're in too right now, Smear Campaign, is we're really trying to teach our congregation and how to make our smaller communities better around us by learning how to respond well to things that we don't feel like responding well to.
Sure, yeah.
And I love today, it was just all about basically taming the tongue and discourse. And how, I've heard you say this a lot, words create worlds. Yeah.
Yep.
And so I thought Ashley did a great job. So Phil, how do you find Ashley? How can we get her back to be here all the time?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, Ashley and Derwin live with their family in Western Michigan. So if you send in notes, we'll forward them to Ashley and Derwin. I feel like it wouldn't take that much. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
Okay.
But like, if you've had one winter in Western Michigan, you've had like about 10 too many. So like a little bit of rain in January and February, I feel like they can hang. But they're a gift. They were amazing. Alyssa and I had lunch with them, yesterday, Saturday. And it was just so fun to be able to catch up. And I really got connected to Ashley through a couple of kind of mutual friends. So they're Midwest. I grew up in the Midwest. A bunch of my like random ministry connections are Midwest church people. And then we had somebody that I've been connected to for a number of years do some stuff with our staff. And when he saw this series, he was like, oh, you should have Ashley come speak. She's releasing a book about the same thing. And so thankfully the dates worked out and the series lined up, and I was really, really thankful. It's one thing when it's like somebody like Scott is teaching, and I know like, hey, we're good, everything's gonna be totally fine. But when you have like a guest communicator come in, sometimes I feel like I need to be around just in case, or hey, how's this gonna go? And it was such a gift because I just knew that Ashley was gonna come in and crush it, and I think really the spirit that we try to carry so well of how do we have a nuanced conversation where we're calling balls and strikes, where we're reviewing politics through the lens of our faith. We still have political convictions. We just don't take those and then sort of tribalize our faith as a result. We work from our faith forward, and I thought she articulated that really well.
I did too. I really appreciate it. And again, if you missed out this message, we really highly encourage you to go back and listen to it. But she kind of talked about 4 things that we can do to help. And I'll just be thinking through these things this week. Phil, I'm curious, is there one of these that sticks out more than another to you? The 4 things are how to approach discourse and what to say and when to say it. The first thing we should be thinking about is this thought something that I would have just when no one's watching?
Right.
Is it just the one that I feel like I need to not jump and process immediately on socials or not? Or is this thought something that I feel good sharing right now? What's my motive behind this thought? Why do I even want to say this? Yeah. Man, I think that one's probably mine. Where did I see this? Is it in person? Or would I say this to this person in person or just online? I think this was in the context of a like digital dialogue.
Yeah.
And final thought was process. Have we invited someone in to process this thing that I'm thinking and feeling with me? So for me, mine was definitely motives. Why do I want to say what I want to say? And I always just try to, Missy and I use this language of like, what's the root of this?
Yeah.
What's the root of this thought? What's the root of this behavior? And so we've kind of helped each other, prod each other along, especially in the dialogue that we have. Sure. Dialogue, the code word for dialogue or discourse.
Sure. Yeah.
Marriage stuff. So when we dialogue.
Keywords like tension.
Yeah. It's a conversation.
Spirited conversation.
Exactly.
I got you. Yeah.
So I always try to ask myself, why do I really want to say this? And usually it's because I want to prove a point or I want to be right.
Sure. Yeah.
And then I have to apologize.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think they're all great.
Yeah.
I think the one that probably I am aware of and that like I think that I actually have pretty big things in my life because of is would I say this when no one's looking, the difference between, I've heard it described as the difference between reacting and responding. And when you go to the text in James 3, or I'm sorry, James 1, that we would be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And I think it's funny that culturally, basically, we've been conditioned to do the exact opposite. And so we get mad first, then we say something, then maybe we'll listen, and then usually apologize because we've done it the wrong way. And so I think one thing for me about that is I'm just really quiet on social media. And so I may post stuff like from Menlo to my stories or, forward people to some extended conversation, maybe even like this one. But in general, I would say that part of it is knowing my personality, like how easy it would be to just be like, oh man, hot take, I'm an Enneagram 8. Like I joke around like I do not need to have a lot of information to have a lot of opinion. And I know that about myself.
Okay.
And so I think it's just an easy way to slow down, to listen to it. She gave the example of like, hey, I'm going to write this email and I'm going to sit on it for 12 or 24 hours.
That was great.
I've done that before, and I think that's a huge blessing. Because even if you just come back to it later and make a few edits, right? Like that is a better version of that email.
Yeah.
And maybe the answer is you don't email it at all, right? Like maybe the answer is it gets deleted. But I think when we react rather than respond, it automatically puts me in a place where I'm usually doing something that is informed a lot more by my selfish desires than what it means for me to walk out faithfully following Jesus today.
Yeah. And that brings up a text-in question that we got this week.
I'm ready.
There's been a lot of questions centering around social media and posts that we're seeing. When and how should I respond? So we'll tackle that one in a bit. But for this one, if we can acknowledge that social media might not be the best place to express all opinions.
Correct.
Or if we know, even if we do express an opinion that we have, that could be triggering for someone else in our family and relationship that might not have the coaching that we're getting right now and how to respond.
Right.
What's okay to post on social media? What's not? How do we discern the difference?
Well, I think some of it is understanding the different nature of social media, right? So some of it is the platform that you're on and like the way that people dialogue. Some of it is, I think, kind of understanding, do you have personal relationship with someone or not? I think that the greater the relationship, probably the greater likelihood that you could or should say something. But I also think the greater the relationship, the more that should be like a DM rather than just a public comment.
Right.
Because we just start posturing, right? Like I joked around about it last week. We've never seen on social media this like just heated debate. And then at the end of it, somebody's like, you know what? I actually see your point. Thank you so much. I totally changed my mind on this. Everybody just gets louder and louder. And part of it is because it's like a schoolyard fight. They know that other people are watching. And depending on the platform, people are actually voting up their responses, right? Like they're gassing them up in the debate. And so I think as quickly as you can get it out of that, the better. And if it's somebody that you can have a conversation with, maybe the DM is just like, hey man, I saw your post. Can we talk about that? I think that probably would be a way better conversation. And I have seen it where somebody put something up, they maybe didn't think about it as thoroughly as they needed to, both sides of the extreme. And somebody reached out to them, had like a thoughtful conversation, and then they pulled it down and said, hey, everybody, sorry, I didn't see how that could be taken, or I didn't think about how that would be received. I just think that is like a win-win, in my opinion, of actual repentance. But I think that there are enough challenges. I just don't know. Public comment chatting, I do not totally know the benefit of that conversation. I think that if you are listening to like a podcast or there's like a helpful article and you can, not in an incendiary way, but like go, I found this helpful in this conversation, and then drop it in, maybe people will go watch or listen to that. But I just think that as quickly as we can get, I've heard the context said, or I've heard this said this way in this context, that the bigger the tension, the bigger the potential fight, the bigger the drama, the more we should take it offline. And I think we're going to do and say things online that we wouldn't do and say in person. And I think that probably says a lot about what we would do and say online.
Yeah. That makes my mind question, is it okay to post anything? Like, what is the value? We're told societally that if I'm on this team, I need to say and posture like I'm on this team.
For sure.
Is that even valuable?
Yeah, I think the idea of advocating for a perspective, I think is okay. I think hopefully it's like a prayed up, processed, I'm thinking about this. But I think, I don't remember if it was week 1 or week 2, I showed like a spectrum of different news outlets. Yeah. And I would say if you're pulling stuff from the edges ideologically, from the far right or the far left, and you're throwing it up without any context, here's what that will likely do. That will likely have people that are your friends on social media unfriend you, and it'll likely have you get high fives from the people that already agree with you. And the byproduct of that, and it's what we see happening with algorithms on social media right now, is that you will be further entrenched, because now all you'll see are the people that agree with you already. And so you'll kind of push each other further and further. And then the same thing for friends that maybe were on the other end of the ideological spectrum, as opposed to what we talked about last week, that actually if we have a diversity of thought, we regulate and modulate each other. Like we all of a sudden go, oh, I'm going to think about this differently. I've talked about this before, but when I preach, I don't just assume people that agree with me are in the room. I've used the framework before of saints, skeptics, and prodigals, and I'm preaching with all three of those people in my mind. And so I'm not going to just say something like, oh, we all agree with, and then say something, because I know that's not true. I know that there's plenty of people that are not even necessarily Team Jesus at this point. And I think that if you're posting on social media in a thoughtful and nuanced way to say, hey, I'd love to have a conversation about this, or I found this helpful, and it's like a thoughtful, helpful discussion, podcast, video, article, I think that's probably way better. I would say in general, like posting of memes is probably not a helpful, like it might feel good. It might feel like you get to dunk on whatever side you're trying to dunk on. But I just think we can be the people, if we're thoughtful about this, we can be the people that even for whom we may disagree, they go, well, she really is thinking about this. He's really thinking about this. They have a perspective. They're not trying to jam it down my throat. They know that not everybody on their feed believes like they believe, but they really care. And I hope, selfishly, I hope some of the resources we put together can be that, right? Like we did an interview with Condoleezza Rice, and, I thought that it was such like a thoughtful conversation, because no matter what side of the ideological spectrum you were, no matter how you thought politically, there were just good resources to think about, like, hey, how do I show up in this conversation? And there are more and more tools like that that are thoughtful and can inform you no matter what your kind of political leanings might be.
Yeah. I'm curious, Phil, will we get coaching towards the latter half of this series on, okay, now we know how to listen. Now we're trying to discern what we post or how we say it. Are we going to get coaching on what to say and when to say it?
Yeah, we'll do a little bit of that next week. I think I would say in the climate that we're in right now, how we show up relationally is a lot more important than what we say ideologically.
Yeah, that's good.
So
that's good.
I think I've heard it said this way before, that we can make a point or we can make a difference. We can rarely make both. And I think that heading into like a very partisan season, I think we really do, like, we're like, man, I want to make a point, and oftentimes when we make that point, we get high fives from people that already agree with us, and we get stiff arms from people that are now no longer in relationship with us. And so getting to know, I think what you identified is so helpful, right? What's the motive? What's the thing under the thing? What's really happening? Because somebody emailed me a really thoughtful email about the first week, and they were talking about, hey, I could tell you my story, and if I told you my story, I bet you would know why I hold to the politics that I do. And he said, I think if you listen to most people's story, you would probably better understand why they hold to the politics that they do.
Yeah.
And I think that's really true, right? Now, there are going to be people that you'd hear their story and they don't hold to those politics. That's fine. But I think when we dehumanize one another and we're just like, oh, they're that team or they're that team, they're that political animal or they're that political animal, I don't think that that's what Jesus would do. And I think we probably have a lot more common ground if we begin by listening to people's stories and then we share our story. And then where there are disagreements, we can come from a place of, hey, actually, we're like 70% on the same page. And maybe 30% is quite different, but let's not start with the 30% different. Let's start with the 70% that's the same. And I think you even heard Ashley, bring up the kind of most recent Pew results, talking about what percent. I mean, really, the only thing that we're agreeing with in America is that politics are no longer fact-based, and that we're less respectful towards one another, right? And so I think a lot of that is happening because we are prioritizing the polarization, and I would argue a little bit cynically that the system is actually incentivized for us to do just that. Because as long as we disagree, as long as we're scared, we'll keep heading in the direction that we believe will take care of our fear.
That brings two things to mind. First is, from our conversation with Dr. Rice, her idea of interest overlap. That's that 70%. Totally. If we can get to that first, we can have a different kind of conversation than if we lead with that 30%.
And she wasn't talking about like your coworker. She was talking about like
political adversaries.
Yeah, like, oh yeah. Like if she's talking about it there.
Yeah.
Like if it works in geopolitics with groups of people that you would think we have nothing in common, how much more should we be able to do it there? And I think in some ways that's really what we see modeled so well with Jesus. It's why he spoke in parables. The reason that he spoke in parables was he could take modern day examples and begin from the places that people understood and then give counterintuitive ideas or ways of thinking about the kingdom of heaven in the midst of their everyday life. He didn't immediately alienate them. He started with what they understood.
Yeah, that's so good. And then second part of this, and I think this would be a great exercise for those that are listening, if you are trying to follow along with us and maybe have conversations, whether that's in your life group, whether that's just with people. It was in the latter bit of Ashley's message where she talked about just kind of this call to leave the security that she had. And she talked about her journey from the corporate workplace to ministry. So Phil, has there been a time or a season in your life where you feel like God has really called you out of something where that you were secure in to take a step? What did that feel like? How'd you do that? What was helpful during that time? And I think this would just be a great question for our communities to ask as we're trying to find ways to connect with people.
Yeah.
I would imagine that most of who we're talking with have had times like this in their lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've got two examples that come to mind. One is I felt called to full-time vocational ministry. I felt called to be a pastor at 8 years old.
That's
And
still crazy to me
it's
every
crazy.
time you say it.
Yeah. And if you don't know my story, you might be like, oh, that kind of checks out. But, abusive family, youngest of 4, debilitating stutter, 2 lazy eyes that had to be surgically corrected, learning disability, reading disability, no style. A lot of that stuff's better. Last one I'm still working on.
You got nice shoes today.
Sure. Yeah, thank you to my wife. And I had that call like very secure, very young. I knew it. And then I was into sports, and I really liked sports, and was pretty good at them when I was young. And when I was playing football, I blew out my knees. It turns out that it was kind of a hereditary thing. It happened to my dad, my oldest brother as well. And I thought, I'm going to get back to it. So I go to physical therapy, but I know football is not making me the person that I need to be in Jesus. It's not moving me towards the call that God has in my life. There were things that God used about it, but it had really outlived its usefulness in my life. And so I get all the way through physical therapy. I go back on the field. I think it was my 3rd game back, and I blew out my knees again. And it was just kind of the Lord like, are you good? I'm not saying God blew out my knees. I'm saying God used my knees getting blown out. And if you want to think about it from like a sovereignty of God, it's actually second-class causation, because there's no detail in the world in which God isn't ultimately saying, go read the book of Job, right? So that was one, like very clear, like it was hard. There were people in my life that said, we love you, we care about you, and honestly, we see that this is probably God's best for you, even though it doesn't feel good right now. And then honestly, coming to Menlo. When we were in Colorado, we'd been there for 7 years. We'd navigated big change. We'd seen so many like really, really good things that God had done. We loved our church. We had great community. We loved our neighborhood. Like, I'm just telling you, man, we were not looking. We loved it. It was awesome. And then to get a call from somebody to say, hey, would you be willing to talk about Menlo Church in California? And I mean, literally, his name's Rob. I was like, how do you know who I am? Like, I am no one on purpose. Don't speak at conferences. Don't write books. I'm a local church pastor. And so I think that process, on the one hand, it was really beautiful because we had nothing to lose and nothing to gain. Like, we were just going to kind of be ourselves and let's see what the Lord would have. And I would say God's already been so gracious in that transition for us and for our family. But I think that oftentimes I would say that it takes God breaking something in us or around us for us to really take that next step. But it doesn't have to work that way. Like, I think when we left Colorado, it wasn't because something had broken. Actually, in the midst of 2020, in the midst of COVID, we were saying all the same stuff that I'm saying right now about politics. And there were people that were really mad that I was saying it. And there was some ugly stuff about it. That would have been the easiest time to go. It would have been like, whether it was leaving our church and going to a different church, or what I saw a bunch of friends of mine do was leaving ministry and going to Marketplace, because it was like, wait, this is lose-lose. This is the worst. And so we really weathered through that storm and felt like God grew us a lot, grew our church a lot, and we're really primed for what God was going to do next. And I think that there's part of me now, even on the other side here at Menlo, where I look back and shout out to that team back there at Eastern Hills, and Tom, who's taken on the lead pastor role there this year, doing great. And they're just crushing, man. And there's parts of me that are like, I wish I got to at least see some of that, But then there's part of me that's just like so proud of them and so grateful that I got to be a part of it. And I think when we hang on too long in the season that we're in, when God is showing us that something different's in front of us, we can either say yes to that or we can say no. But I would say oftentimes you're just saying no for now. This is a hard lesson, but I remember really young, somebody said, in the paradigm of God, humble is less about a characteristic and it's more about a verb, right? You will either be humble or you will be humbled. And so I think when it's like God's saying to you, hey, this is the job, this is the call, this is the relationship, this is the thing that I want you to do. And maybe you're in a situation that you go, I'm not sure I'm ready. I don't know if I want to do that. I'm really comfortable, especially if you're somebody that doesn't love change. I would just say, you can either say, all right, God, I see the clear call that you're giving me on my life, and I know it's going to be uncomfortable, but I'm going to choose to submit to you and step in that direction. Or I'm going to say, no, thank you, and God will break my circumstances to move me. And I've experienced both.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing.
Of course.
That's awesome. Well, Phil, anything else about today? Anything else you want to expand on before we get to our next text-in question?
Yeah, I mean, I hope, I think it was a simple but a really powerful metaphor that Ashley did in the message. If you watched it, you saw it, where she lit a candle. And she just says this, she said this line that I think is like, she describes herself as a writer who speaks. And that's very different, and so she's like, her word economy is very high. None of them are wasted. And so she said this line. She said, for all of us, our words will outlive us. And she talked about the destruction that fire can do or the light that it can provide, right? And it's a direct connection to James 3. And I think I'll just have that like flickering candle in my memory all week to be thinking about, what are my words doing?
So good.
Are they bringing light and help, or are they bringing unnecessary pain? And it doesn't mean that I always say nice and fun things. Part of my job, unfortunately, is sometimes I have to say the hard stuff. But I think there's a way to do that that's still medicine, that's still fruitful. And I thought that was beautiful. It's like in preacher world, you go, hey, how are you going to land the plane? And that was just a beautiful way that Ashley landed the plane.
Awesome. That's so good. We actually kind of got through all of our texting questions.
Look at that. Dude.
I know. Yeah, they just kind of naturally came up. Most of them, to be honest, are around, my ex-relationship person or cousin or whatever family member said this thing online. How do I respond?
Yeah.
Or I'm having trouble. I don't know what to do. So I think this is something we'll probably have to talk about a lot and continue talking about.
Well, and I think it's it's so important. This is true of anything, but I think we want to be in relationship with people. We talked about this in the last series. We want to be in relationship with people where there's no tension. We want it to be like, oh, we're good. We're on the same team. Everything's good. And what that does is, one, it makes our community really, really, really narrow, which is not helpful. It also makes our community, in my experience, kind of fake because it's not true. So, not everybody agrees on everything. So when you get in a room and you're like, well, you have to think like I do spiritually. You have to think like I do politically. You have to line up with me ideologically here. You have to be a Marvel or DC person based on what, how many of these individual things do I go, well, I'll only really let you in to my crew if you check all of these boxes. I think at some point we are incentivizing one another to have superficial, shallow, and oftentimes inauthentic relationships with one another. And so I just think I would encourage you, if that's you and you're going, how am I going to make it through these next few months? I would just let it be okay that when someone tells you that they're voting for the person that you can't imagine voting for, don't feel like you always have to correct them. I mean, they can know who you're voting for, but at the end of the conversation, being able to say, hey, I love you. Thanks for sharing that with me. I hope you know I respect you enough that it helps me to know you and to know the reasons for this. I'm not instantly discrediting you as a human being because I've said this already. There is no political party in America that gets the moral high ground. And so if you go, well, how could somebody possibly vote for a Republican in this election? Look at what they're doing with the border mess. And then somebody on the other side goes, how can someone possibly vote for a Democrat in this election. Look what they're doing with the unborn, right? I'm just saying that in the economy of Jesus, I talked about this in week 1, the kingdom of heaven breaks the political paradigms of our moment. And so if you don't think there's going to be tension in your politics, it's because you're not paying close enough attention to your politics or close enough attention to the way of Jesus. Because when we put them together, we have to vote our conscience, but we are voting in imperfect constructs because neither one of them, none of them perfectly align to the values of the kingdom of heavens. And it doesn't mean that we put our head in the sand. It means that we say, God, I'm going to vote what I believe you're calling me to vote. I'm going to advocate for what I believe you're calling me to advocate for, and I'm going to be in relationships with people that don't see it as the same way that I do. Yeah. And I think we'll be better because of it.
I think so. Yeah, that's so good. I think I want to add to that, and this might be for our older friends that are listening. Sometimes there are things on social media, and we can kind of break out. We'll say Facebook, if you know this person, that's in a separate category. And the broader category of, I saw this inflammatory post online. Posts can be made not in truth, but posts can be made to be inflammatory.
Right.
And I don't think that that's fully talked about or understood.
Yeah.
And so not everything that you see online is someone's actual factual opinion, and probably not even a someone. It could be someone just posting to post. And so as we are trying to go towards a healthier dialogue, we need to not only to discern what we're saying, but also who we're saying it with, who we're giving our attention to, and how we're letting things that are really just meant to poke and inflame us, we don't even really need to give that attention away at all. Yeah.
Well, and as much as that's the case for your uncle or that like friend, that just says something that seems crazy one way or the other, I think it's that way even more so in sort of the, hyper partisan. I talked about in week 1 the sort of infotainment problem that's taken place where, the pundits, I don't have to say their names, that when you watch them, I don't think even they believe everything that they're saying. I think they know that if they are that loud and that extreme in their area, that the group of people that's sort of behind them will stay behind them. Being nuanced and thoughtful it's not nearly as much red meat. And it's even like psychologically. And so I think for us to be able to say, hey, we're going to be the people that are quick to listen, that are slow to speak, that are slow to become angry, because we know that our words create worlds, because we know that our words will outlive us. I think hopefully those lessons from a weekend like this one with some listening magnets and the cues that Ashley gave us, and then go grab her book. Continue to learn, what does it look like for my words to really be about infusing life in the people and relationships I get a chance to be a part of.
That's great. Yeah, go grab her book. I think that's a perfect thing to end with. Phil, thanks so much for your time today.
Of course.
And everyone, thank you so much for adding and contributing to this conversation. You can continue to do so by texting us, 650-600-0402. And thanks to those of you that I've been seeing on campus saying hey and giving me some great feedback and great things to think about on the podcast, as well as those that I met this week that want to come in and hang out and help us, because we are discovering that we have a very talented community that are great at a lot of things. And some of those things I've heard are not as life-giving as others. And when people come in and hang out and post for us or help record something, they say, I felt like I made a difference this week.
Yeah.
So we'd love to have that for you too if you're listening. We have teams that are all over, in person and online, so you can reach out. Have a great week, everybody, and we'll see you soon.
See you, everybody.